Welcome to Terror Tales. Gather around the campfire. Join our circle as we share true, terrifying stories from the shadows of the real world. Subscribe and become part of the camp. The night is long, and you're not alone. My name is Henry, and for 6 months in 2018, I worked as a seasonal security guard for a decommissioned water filtration plant deep in the Catskill Mountains of New York. The place was called the Ashokan Reserve Station, a sprawling complex of early 20th century brick buildings slowly being reclaimed by forest and ivy. My job was simple 8-hour night shifts, 5 nights a week. I was to patrol the perimeter, check the locks on the main gates and building doors, and sit in a small shack filled with monitors linked to a handful of outdated security cameras. The pay was good, the silence was absolute, and I thought it was the easiest money I'd ever make. The isolation was the first character in the story. The station was at the end of a gated service road off Route 28A, miles from the nearest neighbor. The only sounds were the wind in the pines and the distant, constant rush of water in the underground conduits that still channeled water from the reservoir. The cell service was non-existent, and the landline in the shack was my only tether to the world. The first anomaly was minor. During my initial patrol of the main filtration building, a cathedral-like space of rusted iron walkways and enormous, dormant basins, I would sometimes find a single, child-sized rubber boot sitting in the middle of the central walkway. It was bright yellow, old-fashioned, and always clean, as if it had just been placed there. I assumed it was a prank from the day shift guard, an old-timer named Walter. When I asked him about it, he just shook his head and said, "Don't touch it. Just walk around it." The rules were simple, and Walter had drilled them into me. Walk your route clockwise. Never whistle or hum. If you hear a woman singing, go back to the shack immediately and lock the door. And no matter what, do not ever go down into the lower access tunnels. The doors are bolted shut for a reason. For the first month, I followed the rules, but the boot kept appearing. No matter how many times I kicked it into a corner or tossed it into a storage closet, it would be back in the center of the walkway on my next patrol. I started bringing a camera to document it, but the photos always came out blurred, the boot a smear of yellow light. Then the sounds began. It started as a faint, rhythmic scraping, like something heavy being dragged slowly across concrete, one pull every 10 seconds. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, or from deep below my feet. I'd stop walking, and the sound would stop. I'd check the monitors in the shack, panning the cameras across the empty buildings and courtyards. Nothing. One night, the scraping was louder, more persistent. It was coming from the heavy, bolted steel door that led to the lower access tunnels. The door was marked with a faded DNGR, no a DNC sign. As I shone my flashlight on it, I saw that the thick, industrial grade bolt, which I had visually checked at the start of my shift, was now slid open. The heavy chain and padlock hung loose. The scraping sound was emanating from the darkness beyond that door. I called Walter on the landline. His voice was sharp, stripped of its usual gruff calm. "Listen to me, Henry. Slide that bolt shut, right now. Do not go down there." I did as I was told, my hands trembling. The moment the bolt slammed home, the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. The following weeks were a descent into a quiet madness. The boot began to appear in different places, on the passenger seat of my patrol golf cart, on the steps of the shack. The woman's singing started, a faint, melodic hum that seemed to drift on the edge of hearing, always from the direction of the main building. I stopped doing patrols. I sat in the shack, watching the monitors, jumping at every flicker of shadow. The end came on my last scheduled night. A storm had knocked out the power. My generator kicked on, but the security monitors stayed dark. I was alone, in a small pool of light from my battery-powered lantern, with only a radio for communication that emitted only static. The wind howled outside, and the rain lashed against the shack's windows. That's when I heard it, clear as day. Not through the walls, but right next to me, a child's voice, whispering directly into my ear. It was thin and watery, and it said only 2 words, "I'm here." I scrambled back, knocking over my chair. My lantern flickered, and in that split second of darkness, I felt a small, cold, wet hand slip into mine. I screamed, yanking my hand back and fumbling for the door. I ran out into the storm, into the blinding rain, not caring about the direction, only wanting to get away from that shack. I crashed through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes, until I finally stumbled onto Route 28A and flagged down a passing state trooper. I quit that morning. I gave no notice, offered no real explanation. I told my supervisor I had a family emergency and never went back. I tried to put it all behind me, to rationalize it as stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind. But last week, I decided to do some research. I spent days in the local historical society, digging through old newspapers and municipal records. I found a mention of the Ashokan Reserve Station from 1932. During its construction, a flash flood had inundated one of the workers' campsites near the conduit intakes. The body of a 6-year-old boy, the son of one of the engineers, was never recovered. His name was Thomas. The only personal effect they found was one of his boots, a bright yellow rubber rain boot, washed up against a grate deep inside the filtration system. I thought that was the end of it, a tragic story that somehow explained the phenomena, a closed loop. But tonight, I am home in my small apartment in Kingston. The lights are on. The television is playing. I am safe. And yet, as I sit here writing this, I can feel a faint, damp coldness beginning to seep into the air around me. The scent of stagnant water and old metal is faintly perceptible. And from the dark hallway behind me, I just heard it. A soft, wet, scraping sound. And then a whisper, closer than my own breath. It says, "You left," but I followed. My name is Anya, and to understand this, you need to understand the geography. In the summer of 2021, I was part of a botanical survey team in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State. Our base was a remote fire watchtower that was no longer in official use, a 60-foot tall skeletal structure of rusting steel and weathered wood, accessible only by a forgotten logging road that had long since been reclaimed by huckleberry and salmonberry bushes. The nearest town was Trout Lake, a 30-mile drive away on gravel and dirt. The silence there was a physical presence, broken only by the wind in the tall hemlocks and the distant cry of ravens. Our team of 3 was documenting the spread of a specific lichen. The work was methodical and quiet. The first week was uneventful. The days were spent collecting samples. The nights playing cards by the light of gas lanterns in the tower's one-room cabin, 60 feet above the forest floor. The first sign was the footprints. They were small, barefoot, and deeply impressed in the soft, damp earth around our water collection site a quarter-mile from the tower. They were a child's footprints. This was miles from any trail, any road, any conceivable place for a child to be. They circled the small creek, then vanished into a thicket of devil's club, a plant with vicious, spiked stems that no one would willingly enter, least of all a barefoot child. We radioed it in. The Forest Service dispatcher was polite but dismissive. "Probably a bear cub," she said. "The pads can look strange in soft mud." We knew they weren't bear tracks. The next night, we heard the whistling. It was a simple 3-note tune, rising and falling. It was faint, seeming to come from the base of the tower. I leaned out the door. shining my high-powered flashlight down into the impenetrable darkness below. The beam caught nothing but the trunks of trees and the tangled undergrowth. The whistling stopped the moment the light hit the forest floor. We established a new rule: no one left the tower after dark. 2 days later, our team leader, Leo, found the first stick structure. It was a crude teepee of branches, about 2 feet high, assembled at the base of a giant western red cedar. Inside it was a collection of forest detritus, smooth stones, all pellets, and the perfectly clean skull of a squirrel. It was odd, but again, we rationalized it. An art project by a dedicated, if eccentric, hiker. But the next day, there was another one, and another. They formed a rough, widening circle around our tower. Each one was more complex than the last, incorporating bones, feathers, and strands of what looked like human hair caught on the sharp ends of the broken branches. The silence around these structures was profound. No insects buzzed, no birds called. The fear became a member of our team. We stopped talking about what we were seeing. We just worked faster, our eyes constantly scanning the dense, green wall of the forest. Our third member, Sam, a normally unflappable ex-Marine, started sleeping with his large hunting knife on his chest. The climax began on our final scheduled night. A thick, soupy fog rolled in from the Lewis River Valley, swallowing the world in a damp, gray shroud. We could see nothing beyond the railing of the tower. The forest below was utterly silent, a void. We had decided to break camp at first light. The survey be damned. It was Sam who heard it first. A soft, scraping sound from the tower's staircase. Not the metal stairs that led up to the cabin, but the wooden service ladder bolted to the outside of the structure, the one we never used. Scrape, pause, scrape, like a foot, devoid of a shoe, being dragged up each rung. We froze. Leo grabbed the radio. Dead static. The landline phone we had rigged was also dead, the line emitting a low, wet, gurgling sound. We were cut off. The scraping reached the small landing just outside the heavy oak door. We had bolted it from the inside. The door knob, an old, tarnished brass thing, began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. It turned all the way to the stop, strained against the bolt, and then turned back. Then it was still. We didn't breathe. We stood there, staring at the door, for what felt like an hour. Nothing happened. The fog pressed against the windows, a solid wall of gray. Then, a small voice. It was a child's voice, but it was wrong. It was too flat, too old, and it sounded as if it were being pushed through water and gravel. "It's cold out here." It whispered through the crack under the door. "Let me in." Sam shook his head, his face a mask of terror. Leo mouthed, "Don't answer." The voice came again, closer now, as if its mouth was pressed against the keyhole. "I have something for you. I made you a house." A small, twig-like object was slowly, carefully, pushed through the keyhole. It was a tiny, perfectly constructed stick figure, made from the same branches as the structures below. It had a small, white stone for a head, and it was wrapped in a few strands of long, dark hair that matched my own. That's when we broke. Sam screamed, a raw, primal sound, and hurled his heavy metal thermos at the door. The impact was like a gunshot. From the other side of the door came a sound that I will hear for the rest of my life. It wasn't a scream of anger or fear. It was a low, guttural, bubbling laugh. It was the sound of something that had not laughed in 100 years and had forgotten how. Then, silence. The fog began to lift as dawn approached. We didn't move until the sun was fully up, casting long, weak rays through the clearing mist. With trembling hands, we unbolted the door. The landing was empty, but on the weathered wooden planks, leading back to the top of the exterior ladder, was a trail of small, bare, wet footprints, and driven deep into the oak of the doorframe, as if with immense force, was another larger stick structure. This one was a crude, angular replica of our watchtower. and inside its tiny, stick-framed window was a single human molar. We left everything and ran. We hiked the 30 miles to Trout Lake without stopping, too terrified to look back. I thought it was over when I got home to Seattle. I moved apartments. I changed my number. I started therapy. For a few months, I almost convinced myself it was a shared hallucination, a product of stress and isolation. But this morning, I went for a walk in the park near my new home. It was a bright, sunny day. Children were playing on the swings, and there, at the base of a large cedar tree, identical to the ones in the Gifford Pinchot, was a small, carefully constructed teepee of sticks. Inside it was a collection of city detritus, a bottle cap, a pigeon feather, and a recent photograph of me walking to my new apartment that had been taken from outside my window. Scrawled on the back of the photograph in faint, mud-colored ink were two words: "Your home." My name is Elias, and for 2 years I served as a temporary keeper at a decommissioned lighthouse on a remote, nameless island off the coast of Maine. The island was little more than a granite fist thrust out of the Atlantic, a mile long and half a mile wide, accessible only by a once-monthly supply boat from Bar Harbor. The lighthouse itself, the Cleft Rock Light, was a 19th century sentinel of whitewashed brick and black iron, automated decades ago. My job, arranged through obscure trust, was simply to be a presence, to perform minor maintenance, and to ensure the old keeper's house didn't fall into complete disrepair. It was a solitary gig for a solitary man, and I relished the silence. The silence, however, was the first thing to change. It began about 3 months in. I started hearing a new sound beneath the constant wind and the crash of waves. It was a low, resonant hum, so deep it was felt in the bones more than heard by the ears. It seemed to emanate from the island itself, a vibrational drone that would start at sunset and cease at dawn. I checked the old generator, the water pumps, the emergency beacon. Everything was silent. The hum was organic, a part of the landscape. Then came the tides. The tidal charts, which had been my Bible, became unreliable. The water would recede far further than it should, exposing seabeds I had never seen, littered with strangely smooth, black stones and the waterlogged skeletons of long, dead trees. Other times, it would surge high without a storm, swallowing the small pebble beach and lapping at the foundation of the keeper's house. During one extreme low tide, I saw them, a series of perfectly geometric grooves cut into the bedrock of the exposed sea floor. They formed a spiral pattern wide enough to walk in, leading out from the base of the island's cliffs and vanishing into the deep water. They looked ancient, but freshly cleared of algae and barnacles. The local wildlife was the next indicator. The gulls, usually bold and thieving, abandoned the island. The seals that often basked on the offshore rocks disappeared. The only life that remained were the crabs, which grew abnormally large and aggressive, and a specific type of bioluminescent plankton that would gather in the cove at night, glowing with a sickly, greenish, purple light. The previous keeper, an old man named Abram, who had met me on the mainland for a brief, taciturn handover, had given me one piece of advice that now echoed in my mind. "The rock remembers," he'd said, his eyes clouded with cataracts. "Don't walk the spiral when the moon is black, and never answer the sea when it calls your name." I had dismissed it as the rambling of a man too long alone. One night, during a new moon when the sky was a void and the only light came from the eerie glow in the cove, I saw the figure. I was in the lantern room of the lighthouse, 150 feet above the sea. A movement on the spiral grooves below caught my eye. A tall, slender shape was walking the spiral path from the deep water inward, toward the base of the cliff. Its movements were fluid but wrong. its limbs articulating in ways that suggested an anatomy not meant for air. It paused at the center of the spiral, directly below me, and looked up. It had no face. Where a face should have been was a smooth, pale, featureless expanse that reflected the faint starlight. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering. When I gathered the courage to look again, it was gone. The only evidence was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the iron frame of the tower for the rest of the night. After that, the calls began. It started as a distant, melodic sound, like a whale song filtered through a human voice. It was beautiful and sorrowful, and it echoed off the cliffs in a way that made it impossible to locate. Over the weeks, the calls changed. They began to incorporate syllables, fragments of words that almost made sense. Then, one night, as I lay awake in the keeper's house, I heard it clearly through the wall, a voice that sounded like the sea washing through a cavern of bones. It whispered my name, Elias. I broke the rule. I did not answer, but I also did not leave. A morbid, terrifying curiosity had taken root in me, a need to understand what shared this island with me. The final descent began on a night shrouded in a thick, cold fog. The supply boat was a week overdue. The hum was louder than ever, a physical pressure in my skull. The glowing plankton in the cove was so bright it illuminated the fog in a haunting, spectral radiance. And the voice from the sea was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, resonant call, speaking in full, grammatically perfect sentences, telling me things it could not possibly know. Memories from my childhood, secrets I had never told anyone. It promised me knowledge. It promised me I would never be lonely again. Driven by a compulsion I no longer recognized as my own, I left the house and walked down to the cove. The fog and the ghastly light created a dome of visibility around me. There, standing in the shallow water where the spiral grooves met the land, was the figure. It was taller than a man, its skin glistening like wet marble. The smooth plane of its head was tilted, regarding me. "Join us?" "Elias," the voice said, but its head did not move. The sound came from the water and the air around me. The water is memory. The rock is a record. We have been waiting for a listener. I took a step back, my survival instincts finally screaming through the trance. But it was too late. From the glowing water, more figures emerged. Dozens of them. They were not all the same. Some were skeletal and slow, draped in rags of seaweed. Others were more solid, their forms shifting and indistinct. And at their center was one that was horribly familiar. It was Abram, the old keeper. But his eyes were gone, replaced by the same smooth, featureless skin as the others. He opened his mouth, and a chorus of 100 drowned voices spoke as one. "You are the keeper now?" "Forever?" I turned and ran. I fled back to the house, bolted the door, and spent the night trembling in a corner. The next morning, the sun was shining. The hum was gone. The sea was calm. I packed a single bag and waited on the dock for the supply boat, convinced I had finally succumbed to insanity. The boat came. I didn't say a word to the captain. I just got on and stared at the island until it vanished over the horizon. I moved back to the mainland, to a small city in New Hampshire. I got a job, an apartment on the 4th floor, far from any large body of water. I locked the experience away in a dark corner of my mind. For a year, I almost convinced myself it was a prolonged psychotic break. Then, the dreams started. Vivid, tactile dreams of walking the spiral path, of the pressure of the deep, of a cold, vast consciousness welcoming me home. I would wake up with the taste of salt water in my mouth and the sound of humming in my ears. This morning, I went to the doctor for a persistent earache. He looked into my ear with his otoscope, his friendly demeanor fading into a puzzled frown. "That's odd," he said. "I've never seen anything like that." He showed me the small mirror he used. Deep within my ear canal, visible only with the focused light, was a tiny, perfect, and unmistakable patch of skin. It was smooth, pale, and completely featureless. And as I sit here now, writing this, I can feel it beginning to spread. The hum has started again, a faint vibration deep inside my skull, and a new voice, my own, but filtered through the memory of the sea, is whispering from a place deep inside me that I no longer control. It says, "The keeper is returning to the rock." My name is Ben, and to understand the depth of this terror, you must first understand the setting. It was the fall of 2015. My girlfriend, Chloe, and I had just moved from Chicago to a rented farmhouse in the flat, endless expanse of rural Kansas, outside a town so small it barely registered on the map, Bison, Kansas. The house was a 2-story Victorian, a lonely sentinel of peeling white paint and gingerbread trim standing stark against the sea of dormant wheat fields. It came with 10 acres of land for a price that seemed too good to be true. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman from Hayes, said the owners lived overseas and just wanted someone to keep the pipes from freezing. The isolation was immediate and absolute. Our nearest neighbor was a mile down a gravel road that turned to thick, chocolatey mud in the rain. The only sounds were the prairie wind, a constant, moaning presence, and the creaking of the house itself. The first week was idyllic. The silence was a novelty. The vast, star-filled skies at night felt like a private planetarium. The first incident was the radio, an old AM/FM unit we kept in the kitchen for background noise. One evening, as dusk settled, the clear classic rock station from Hayes dissolved into a roar of static. From the speaker emerged a low, guttural whisper, unintelligible at first, like stones grinding together. It lasted for 10 seconds before the music snapped back. We blamed atmospheric interference. Then came the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and always seemed to originate from the floor above, regardless of which floor we were on. The house had an unfinished attic, accessible only by a pull-down ladder in the hallway. The first time we heard it, I grabbed a heavy mag light and went up. The attic was a cavern of dust, cobwebs, and the brittle skeletons of long dead mice. The dust on the floor was utterly undisturbed. There were no footprints but our own. Chloe, an artist, began to change. She became withdrawn. The vibrant colors she usually painted with gave way to dark, muddy tones. She started sketching in a new notebook, her hand moving in frantic, jerky motions. When I asked to see, she would snap it shut. "Just studies of the landscape," she'd mutter. The landscape outside was flat and featureless. The occurrences escalated in subtle, psychological ways. We'd find all the kitchen cabinets standing open in the morning. The smell of damp earth and old potatoes would fill the house, with no source to be found. One night, I woke to find Chloe standing by the bedroom window, staring out into the blackness of the field. "He's walking again," she whispered, her voice flat. When I looked, there was nothing. I began to feel a constant, crawling sensation of being watched, a pressure at the back of my neck that never fully abated. The prairie wind no longer sounded like wind. On certain nights, it sounded like a chorus of faint, mournful voices carried from miles away. The breaking point began with the photographs. We had a digital camera we used for documenting the property. One afternoon, we took a series of pictures of the house from the edge of the field. When we reviewed them on the laptop later that night, we saw it. In every single photo, in one of the second-story windows, was a tall, dark silhouette. It was man-shaped but impossibly thin, its head cocked at an angle that suggested a broken neck. Its face was a blur, but in every image, you could make out two faint, pinpoint smudges of light where its eyes should be. We packed a bag that night and drove to a motel in Hayes. The next day, fueled by daylight and a desperate need for answers, I went to the local historical society. The elderly woman there was helpful until I gave her the address. Her smile vanished. "That's the old Hadley place," she said, her voice dropping. "Folks around here don't talk about it much." She dug out a thin file. The records were sparse. The original family, the Hadleys, were homesteaders. The father, Elias Hadley, was described in a newspaper clipping from 1921 as a deeply religious man prone to fits of melancholy. The article was about a tragedy. In the depths of a particularly harsh winter, Elias Hadley had suffered a nervous fever. Believing his family was possessed by demons, he had locked his wife and 3 children in the root cellar, a deep, cold hole in the ground behind the house, and set the main house on fire before disappearing into the blizzard. He was found frozen to death a mile away. When neighbors dug the family out days later, the mother and 2 of the children had suffocated, but the youngest child, a 6-year-old boy named Jacob, was found alive, curled in a corner, whispering to something only he could see. The file contained one more thing, a photocopied photograph of the Hadley family. Elias Hadley was a tall, gaunt man with a severe face, and standing beside him, his small hand in his father's, was the little boy Jacob. His head was tilted at a distinct, unnatural angle. We broke our lease. We told the landlord we had family emergencies and never went back. We moved to a bright, noisy apartment in Denver. And for a year, we tried to rebuild our lives. The memory of the house began to feel like a bad dream. Chloe started painting with color again. The shadows seemed to have lifted. Then, last week, Chloe was cleaning out her studio closet. She called me in, her voice trembling. In her hand was the sketchbook she had used in Kansas, the one she had refused to show me. She thought she had left it behind. "I don't remember packing this," she said, her face pale. I took it from her. The pages were filled with those dark, frantic sketches I remembered. But as I flipped towards the end, to the drawings she had made in the final weeks, my blood ran cold. They were no longer landscapes. They were interiors. Detailed, perfect renditions of our Denver apartment. The view from our kitchen window. The layout of our living room. And in every single drawing, somewhere in the corner, hidden in the shadows of a doorway or peering from behind a piece of furniture, was the tall, thin silhouette of the man from the window, his head cocked at that broken angle. The final page was a new drawing, one she swore she didn't remember making. It was a portrait of me, sleeping in our current bed, and leaning over me, its featureless face inches from mine, was the silhouette. Below it, in Chloe's handwriting, but with a frantic, desperate slant, were the words, "We followed. You can have the house. We don't want the house anymore." My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and my field is mycology. In the winter of 2019, I was part of a small research team dispatched to a remote biological station in the North Cascades of Washington, located in a narrow valley deep within the Okanogan, Wenatchee National Forest. Our mission was to document a previously unrecorded, bioluminescent fungal species that fruited only under heavy snowpack. The station was a single, long building constructed in the 1960s, built on concrete pylons and divided into a lab space, a common area, and 6 small dormitory rooms. It was a fortress against the elements, powered by a groaning generator and heated by a reluctant oil furnace. The isolation was part of the protocol. We were a team of 4, cut off for a 6-week stretch, with a scheduled supply drop at the midway point. The silence that fell after the helicopter departed was profound, broken only by the wind scarring the valley and the creak of the buildings settling under the accumulating snow. The first anomaly was not a sound or a sight, but an absence. Our research required the deployment of several sensitive audio recorders to capture the infrasound of the valley, which we theorized might trigger the fungal blooms. But from day one, The recordings were useless. Every playback, regardless of the time of day or location, was layered with a constant, low-level static. It was a white noise that seemed to have a pattern, a rhythmic, breathing quality just beneath the surface. We checked and re-checked the equipment. It was all brand new state of the art. The static was in the environment itself. Then, we began to notice the shadows. The station had large, double-paned windows to observe the forest. At night, with the interior lights on, they became black mirrors. We would catch glimpses of movement in the reflections. Tall, slender shapes passing behind us in the room. But when we turned, the room was empty. It was always in the periphery, a flicker of wrongness that vanished when confronted directly. Dr. Evans, our team lead, dismissed it as cabin fever and the strain of the inverted day-night cycle our work required. The fungal species, which we tentatively named Mycena lucifragus, was even more bizarre than initial reports suggested. Its glow was not a gentle green or blue, but a cold, actinic purple. And it didn't just glow, it pulsed. When we extracted a sample and placed it in the lab's sterile environment, its pulsing quickened, synchronizing not with any external stimulus we could measure, but seemingly with our own heartbeats. The static on the audio recorders in the lab would also intensify when the samples were active. 2 weeks in, the supply drop failed. A blizzard closed in, and the helicopter couldn't reach us. We were informed via our satellite upland, our only tether to the world, that we were on our own for at least another 10 days. It was that night that the knocking started. It began as a soft, tentative tapping on the outer walls of the station. Not on the doors or windows, but on the insulated aluminum siding itself. It would move, circling the building over the course of an hour. We would rush to a window, but the external motion sensor lights revealed nothing but driving snow. The knocking wasn't random. Evans, a former musician, noted it had a cadence. "It's in 7/8 time," he said, his face ashen. "It's a rhythm." The situation deteriorated rapidly. Our communications technician, Riley, began to suffer from crippling migraines, complaining that the static was getting inside my head. She started spending hours staring at the spectral analysis screen of our audio equipment, which visualized the static as a complex, ever-shifting waveform. "It's not noise," she whispered to me one night. "It's data. It's trying to talk." The most terrifying development was the snow. We began to find patterns in it each morning. Intricate, fractal spirals and precise geometric shapes were stamped into the fresh powder in the clearing around the station. They were beautiful and alien, and they were made overnight, during the worst of the storm, with no footprints leading to or from them. The end began on the 28th night. The generator failed. We were plunged into absolute darkness and a silence that was immediately filled by the knocking. It was no longer tentative. It was a forceful, demanding bend on the walls, moving faster, still in that unnatural 7/8 rhythm. We huddled in the common area, our headlamps creating frantic, dancing shadows. Riley was gone. We found her in the lab, her face bathed in the sickly purple light of a dozen fungal samples she had activated. The static from the speakers was deafening. She was humming along with it, her eyes wide and unseeing. "The signal isn't in the air," she said, her voice a dry rasp. "The air is the carrier wave. The signal is in the silence between the snowflakes. It's in the dark between the stars. It's been here so much longer than us." The main door, a heavy reinforced thing, suddenly buckled inward with a sound of shearing metal. Not from an impact, but from a profound, sustained pressure. Through the cracking plexiglass window in the door, we saw not a shape, but a distortion, a column of shifting darkness that made the falling snow swirl in impossible patterns. The temperature in the room plummeted. We fled to the back of the station, to the emergency radio room, sealing a bulkhead door behind us. Evans tried the satellite phone. It was dead. The only sound from the handset was that same breathing static. He picked up the VHF radio, his hands shaking so badly he could barely key the mic. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Cascade Biological Station. We are under. The radio crackled to life, but not with a response. A voice came through, synthesized and flat, the kind used for text to speech. It was the same voice we later learned was used by the system at the University of Washington that was monitoring our data feed. The voice said, "CST cheminen, aspikaman eskantanendi, yo arte data." The bulkhead door behind us began to groan, the metal around the lock beginning to frost over and turn brittle. I don't know how I survived. I remember a confusion of blinding whiteness, of cold, and of a sound that was not a sound but a silent scream that filled my skull. I woke up outside, half buried in a snowdrift 100 yards from the station. Search and rescue found me 3 days later. They found no one else. The official report cites a catastrophic generator failure, leading to hypothermia and psychosis, resulting in the deaths of 3 researchers and the sole survivor suffering from profound shock and memory loss. They believe their version of events. I know the truth. I was debriefed in a sterile office in Seattle. I told them everything. The man from the agency listened patiently, then slid a file across the table. "It's over, Dr. Thorne. The station has been sealed. The area is quarantined. You are safe." But as I left the room, I saw it on his desk, next to his computer. A small, potted plant, and nestled at its base, fruiting in the climate-controlled office air, was a tiny, pulsating mushroom, glowing with a faint, familiar, actinic purple light. I live in a different city now. I changed my name. I try to blend in. But every time it rains or the power goes out, or I hear static on a radio, I feel that coldness creeping back. They think they contained it. They are wrong. It wasn't trapped in that valley. It was growing there. And now, it's sampling the world outside. Last night, my television turned to a dead channel by itself. The screen filled with rolling static. And in the patterns of the noise, for just a moment, I saw a face. It was Riley. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, and her eyes were glowing with a deep, cosmic purple. Then it was gone, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hiss. And now, from the kitchen, I can hear a soft, tentative sound, a quiet, precise tapping. It's in 78 time.